Hej! Ivar Arpi här. Från och med nu är jag en del av Kvartal. Kul va? Det tycker jag i alla fall. Kanske lite oväntat. Eller inte alls oväntat. Jag vet inte. Men nu är jag här i alla fall och jag har tagit med mig mina 2 poddar. För dig som följer Kvartal innebär det att du nu får ytterligare 2 poddavsnitt varje vecka. I podden Rak höger med Ivar Arpi så intervjuar jag framträdande politiker, akademiker eller författare. Eller bara människor som är intressanta på något sätt. Och i podden Under kritik som jag har ihop med Anna-Karin Windham så slår vi både näven och handväskan i bordet om aktuella och rykande inaktuella händelser. Och båda poddarna utkommer som sagt en gång i veckan. För dig som ännu inte har blivit prenumerant antingen på Kvartal eller på min Substack Rak höger så betyder det här att du nu kan få all min journalistik och hela resten av Kvartal med en enda prenumeration. Och just nu så får du första månaden helt gratis om du går till kvartal.se/testa Ivar. Gör det, tycker jag. Testa Ivar. För då kan du lyssna på hela avsnitten av mina 2 poddar, helt reklamfritt dessutom. Och så får du hela Kvartals växande utbud på köpet, inklusive alla poddar i fullversioner och utan reklam, som du kan höra direkt i Kvartals app eller i exempelvis Podcaster eller Spotify. Eller där du väljer att lyssna på din podd. Så gå till kvartal.se/testa Ivar för att testa det nya och växande Kvartal helt gratis första månaden. Tänk själv, som de säger här på Kvartal. Men gör som jag säger och testa Ivar.
Tänk om din plånbok kunde prata. Vad skulle den då säga om din relation till ekonomi?
Alla relationer har ju sina ups and downs. Men att han har lån lite här och där, det tror jag skulle vara en ick för rätt många plånböcker och inte bara för mig.
Ett första steg mot en bättre relation till sin plånbok kan vara att samla sina lån.
Samla dina lån till ett på lendo.se.
My guest today is Coleman Hughes, one of the most interesting voices in the American debate about race and identity. His book, The End of Race Politics, has just been translated into Swedish under the title Färgblind and is being published by No Polar Publishing. We talk about what colorblindness really means and why he thinks that it's the only way out of race-based politics. We talk about Black Lives Matter, about myths and how they can turn into truths when they're repeated often enough, and about Martin Luther King's legacy and what he actually stood for. We also talk about culture, about jazz and authenticity, about beauty and representation, and why some forms of anti-racism have ended up becoming racist in practice. This is a conversation about finding a way out of both left and right-wing identity politics. But now, on to today's guest. You're listening to Rak höger with me, Ivar Arpi. Welcome, Coleman Hughes, to Rak höger.
Good to be with you.
I've followed you for a very long time, and maybe I think I started noticing you during the Summer of Love, as it's called, the 2020 Black Lives Matter, and you started looking around for different voices. Like there were so many in the United States back then. People were voicing different kinds of views, and you were one of the people who were, from my perspective, being more reasonable. But of course, that's I had written a book a few years before, which was called "That's How We All Became Racist," and then when it came out, everybody said, this is nobody cares about this stuff anymore. Like everybody agrees. And then Black Lives Matter came along and everybody cared again. And now your book has been translated into Swedish. So it's called The End of Race Politics in English and Färgblind in Swedish. And the main
like the main thrust of the argument is basically like we've become obsessed with race, especially in the US. In Sweden and Europe, it's basically the same, but it's a little bit different. But could you just explain what you mean by colorblindness?
Yeah. So when I say colorblindness, I mean that you should treat people without regard to race. You shouldn't treat me differently because I'm black or white or Asian or purple or anything. And both in your personal life and in public policy. In America, we have, had and still have in certain ways, an array of public policies and laws that discriminate in favor of certain groups and against other groups on the basis of race. And all of this is done with good intentions to try to make the world a better place. And my argument is that all of the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And that
it can be paved by bad intentions as well.
That is also true. But that's obvious.
Yeah.
The less obvious road to hell is through good intentions. And that's part of my point in this book, is to say everyone already agrees that white supremacy is bad. That old school kind of racism is obviously bad. You don't really need to write a book persuading people it's bad. We just have to keep an eye on it, make sure it doesn't flare up. And there is a danger of it flaring up, to be very clear. The reason I wrote a book about the racism that comes from the left side of the political spectrum is because a lot of people are confused about it, and they actually think it is social justice. They think it's social justice to say, whiteness is evil, whiteness is bad, whiteness is oppression, and we need to basically follow people of color and black people. Of course, they don't mean black people like me. They mean black people with a very specific, narrow range of politics. And we need to basically let them guide us and do everything they say, even if the policies make no sense, even if the policies hurt black people and everyone else. And we need to basically discriminate our way into an equitable future. And my argument is no. There's no way to get to the colorblind reality through discrimination. That actually the best path for a multi-ethnic, multi-racial society is to just stop discriminating. And insofar as we need to address the disadvantaged, we should do that, as Martin Luther King prescribed, on the basis of class, not on the basis of race.
I mean, I have a friend who I think he was the one who introduced me to you, and he around the same time he's very into he's doing programming computer games, and so he was into that community, and he sort of noticed a shift in tonality, like the woke ideology entered the gaming forums that he was talking, and then he actually argued for I don't think this is the right way. Basically, we should treat everybody the same. And then he quoted Martin Luther King, and that was like a tell, everybody on the forum, oh, you just lost the argument. You used Martin Luther King. You quoted Martin Luther King, and I was just wondering, is that something that it seems like if you're doing that, maybe it's if you're a white person, a person who's perceived as having privilege, and you say, I don't think we should focus so much on the color of the skin, but the content of the character. That's a sure way to, in some corners, you've already lost the discussion.
Yeah, it's a weird thing though, because the reason they do that is because they don't actually have a counter argument, right? Everyone agrees that basically Martin Luther King was a very wise man who led the civil rights movement peacefully towards its goals, and successfully managed to bring down Jim Crow and legalized white supremacy without targeting a single white person while keeping a lid on what could have been a violent movement. It's an incredible accomplishment. And it wasn't only him, it was all other civil rights leaders like Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph and all these people. But if you quote him today, I mean, there's this game that's played every single Martin Luther King Day in America. It's literally happens every Martin Luther King Day. There's a whole slew of articles that come out, and they all say the same thing. They all say something like, Martin Luther King was actually a radical, and he would have agreed with BLM. And the only reason you think he wouldn't is because his legacy has been co-opted and sanitized and whitewashed by conservatives. And there's this one quote that if you take it out of context, it seems like he's justifying riots. But actually, if you read the whole thing, he's saying the opposite. But they don't say that part.
No.
And it's literally like these articles are so brain dead, they're basically just copied from each other. Yeah. Like they're all the same article. I've read all 15 of them. They're carbon copies. They use the same words sometimes. And basically what they do is they say he's a radical, and then when you double click, you're like, okay, where's the evidence he was a radical? And they all say the same thing. They go, well, he opposed the Vietnam War way before that was mainstream, which is true.
Yeah.
And he got a lot of flack for it. And he was for universal health care, and he was for a higher minimum wage, and he was for federal work guarantees, all these like democratic socialist policies, like Bernie Sanders type.
Swedish.
Yeah, like sweet, exactly. And then I'm like, okay, but you said he was a radical about race stuff, and they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, but where's the evidence he was a radical about race stuff? And they're like, do you remember what I said about the Vietnam War? And I'm like, yeah, but hold on. What the hell does that have to do? You're telling me he was a radical about race issues and he would have agreed with BLM, which is telling me to defund the police, that that America's fundamentally white supremacist and has to be torn down in order to be rebuilt. And that race is the most important thing about somebody, and that white people can never really fully understand black people, right? Yeah. Where did he say any of that? Never. He never said it. He was steadfast on the idea that your race is not the most important thing about you. He never wavered on that. And in his final book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, he dedicates the entire second chapter to a critique of the BLM of his time, which was the Black Power movement.
I mean, it was you said in the beginning, like, they don't mean black people like me. They mean somebody in a very narrow... and there's always been like within the civil rights movement, and even earlier than that there's like the more like strident or militant and focused on your identity, and as an African American you are, the more authentic you are. I mean, I grew up listening to hip hop, and there was like a song about, I think it's Tupac. I'm not sure if he's quoting someone, but it's like the darker the skin, the deeper the roots, or something like that.
The blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice.
Yeah, but he says like his shift like so, like you're purer and you're more authentic.
Right.
And I just wanted, like, is there a, if one would try to steel man that I don't agree with, but I heard that you play trombone, for example. Is there if you're playing jazz music, for example, like there's I loved Freddie Hubbard, Miles Davis, and all those jazz musicians, and then sort of started noticing when I listened to Dave Brubeck or some of the white jazz musicians, there's like I didn't know about this because I was like 13, 14 years old, and started reading like in the CD convolutes, like so there was like they couldn't play, and he played with the black musicians, and then like but is there some truth to the claim that there's like some things that are how do you say, like authentically black, and you can like it's actually something that is okay to like enjoy, like it's like a black musician playing like blues or soul food, for example. Like, is it something? Is that how should one approach such things? Because it's like it's tied to like African American history, like the music, and but it's also become like I was a Swedish kid, like obviously not black, listening to the music, loving the music. But could I like enjoy the fact that it's like a black musician, that it's tied to the black history, without also like saying like, oh, this is the way black people are? Or do you understand where I'm?
I think so. I mean, so there's such a thing as Black American culture. Black American culture produced, to a large extent, produced jazz music, although it also had inputs from other parts of American culture. From West Coast jazz had a lot of, there's a lot of white guys involved in West Coast jazz. There was also a lot of Jewish composers, especially, involved in jazz. But to a large extent, jazz was heavily African American, as has been hip hop. I love jazz. I love hip hop. Soul food. Like, my grandma grew up. My grandma would cook collard greens. That's like very soul food, and you're allowed to love all of that stuff the same way that you're allowed to learn about and love any culture.
Yeah, but I just wanted, like, is there because I wrote about this when I was working as a editorial writer at Svenska Dagbladet. There's a great restaurant. It's not a fine restaurant. It's just like it's a lunch restaurant, and they serve Swedish traditional food, and it's like the things a lot of us ate when we grew up or in school. And basically, that's what they serve in different dishes. But the people who own the place I think they are Iranian or Kurdish, or so it's like a family restaurant. But like, should I like enjoy it? Would I enjoy it more if there were like ethnic Swedes, or if like I go to a Chinese restaurant and there's like Arabs like cooking the?
Why would you enjoy it more?
No,
could. I mean,
I'm just asking. Like, is that like is that the case where like a soft racism is okay? Like, I want to go to Harlem and listen to, like, this is the mind of a tourist, and I was just wondering if that is like a case where race actually, or culture, it actually like gives another dimension, or if it's and if so, how could you argue for both the colorblindness, like in state law and everything, like you argue, but still be able to like enjoy the
so I get it. You're talking about like performances. Like if I go to Japan and I want to see kabuki theater, I want to see Japanese people doing it, because
you don't want to see me doing it.
I don't want to see you doing it, even if you're good at it.
I'm not.
But hypothetically, like,
but I have like a kabuki teacher like right next door. But I could have potentially be good at it.
Right. So, I mean, the example you're giving is one where you want to see not only an authentic performance, but you want the people who are doing it to be from, or at least look like they are from, the culture that created the thing for entertainment's sake, basically, right? So I don't really have a problem with that. I mean, the only thing is it really, in our culture, it doesn't go both ways. So, for example, I performed with Rihanna at the MTV VMA Awards in 2017. She wanted like musicians behind her at the performance. You could see it on YouTube, and it was awesome. She's super cool. And initially they had hired like musicians of various races, but then at some point they decided they wanted all black musicians. And so they had like fired some of the musicians that they had already hired, including one of my friends who was Hispanic. and like replaced him with a black dude, which I thought was pretty fucked up. But ultimately, like, if you want to put on a certain aesthetic, then go ahead. But the problem is that, can you do it the other way around? In other words, can a Swedish person cook Egyptian food? You might get away with it, you might get protested or canceled, as has happened literally. There's been cases of restaurants getting social media cancellation campaigns because it's a white person cooking non-white food.
Which is like the most insane thing.
Yeah. Now, if a country music artist, Carrie Underwood or something, had hired a band, which included some black people, and then she fired the black people because she wanted an all-white show because country's white. Yeah. That might be the end of her fucking career. Yeah. So my point is we should try to have some kind of consistency with what the norms are for performance. Yeah. In terms of creating an aesthetic where race is a component of the aesthetic. Yeah. You know,
I just think that because I've also argued like we should be try to be like neutral in like not saying that there are of course discrimination, racism, but we shouldn't try to be a racist and discriminating to accommodate or achieve an equitable future. But like there are perhaps cases when it's sort of more okay. But as you say, like then it should be able to go both ways.
I don't really have a problem curating the racial makeup of a performance for aesthetic reasons. It's like, if you're a movie director, you're going to choose certain races for certain roles. Yeah. And you don't have to be colorblind. You don't have to pretend that you don't care whether the actor you hire is white or black or Hispanic, because it could matter for the role. Yeah. So I don't have a problem with that.
And that's one of the problems I have with how the woke ideology or the identity politics entered Hollywood and because I actually think it can add something. Like if you switch out a character from a play in Shakespeare, and you could switch out half of the cast for black characters. Like if you know what you're doing and you're trying to achieve something with it. But if you're just doing it and no, I don't understand what you're talking about. There's no you're not trying to say anything in that world or in that context. But if you were doing that, you're adding a dynamic, you could actually it can be interesting. And you switch it up and you put it in another context. That's I think that's fantastic. And that's one of the have more black actors in certain parts, but when you do it you put them in just because you need to fulfill a quota or then it becomes something else, and then you're not really interested in what it adds to the show either.
Yeah, in 2020 the Oscars came out with a set of diversity requirements for Hollywood films to be considered to win an Academy Award, right? And so I forget the exact wording, but basically you had to have a certain amount of people in the movie, a certain number of people in the movie had to be non-white or whatever, and I thought to myself, this is such a ridiculous thing, because how is the movie Belfast going to have black people? Yeah. It's about Belfast. In 1970, there were no black people. Yeah. So, and I think it leads to an effort to shoehorn black people into roles that aren't meant to be black characters. And I agree, there's a way to do it cleverly, but you kind of have to have that intention from the start. If you're serious about world building, like in Lord of the Rings or something, you're serious about world building. Well, there's a reason that the hobbits look different there's a world built reason why the hobbits look different than the dwarves, look different than the elves.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to have different races of people, then it has to be motivated. There has to be, it's great to do it, but you can't like shoehorn it in after the story's already written, because then you've destroyed the world building.
Yeah.
Kind of. But it's I think in fantasy is where it's easiest to do, because it's like it's already fantasy.
Yeah.
Of course there can be black people. It just there just has to be a reason why two groups of people look different. Or you can do the thing where you leave it totally unexplained, like Bridgerton or whatever. I think, do they leave it unexplained in Bridgerton? Maybe not. Maybe that's not a good example. I shouldn't.
But they have it in Wheel of Time. They just can't, like it was
Right.
the fantasy show, and the Robert Jordan, enormously long fantasy that I started reading when I was, so you're captured, because you need to know how it ends. It's like 17,000 pages or something.
Right.
And like the last season was the best, but they have an in-world explanation, which is basically like there is like a world sundering event where everybody's spread out, and that's actually in the story.
Right. Okay.
And that's how
Then
they
that makes
explain
sense.
that there are like
People. That's all you got to do. You just,
so they
you
actually
just got to give me some bridge into your world building, and then
first I was annoyed because it's not like that in the books.
Right.
So if you read the books, like, well, I don't want it to be like that.
Right.
I want it to be like in the books. But then you're like, okay, but this is actually makes sense in this world. So I stopped caring after like 1 or 2 episodes. Okay, now I'm invested in the TV series.
Right.
There is a, like, when you write about Black Lives Matter, like there's it of course there was like a truth to the like there were truths in the Black Lives Matter protests, like there's a lot more black people in prison than is proportional to the population in general, and there's more historically black people have been more targeted by police, I think, especially like in the 90s there were the Watts riots, and because of the police were hitting an unarmed black man, and like as I said, I listened to hip hop, and there were a lot of songs that was about that. So
Fuck the police coming straight from the underground.
Yeah, and we had to tear this motherfucker up by Ice Cube, which is specifically about like we should like this is what we had to do to get your attention, basically. And you can. So there's like a history here, of course, but as you say, there are also like cases which is very similar to the George Floyd case, which is one of them is Tony Timpa, and he died almost the same way, and but he was a white guy, and I would just like how much of the Black Lives Matter was based on like a symbolic truth which maybe wasn't really true, and how much was like this is like it's a wider problems. Maybe this case wasn't perfect, but like it addressed something, a wider problem against the black community, about systemic racism against the black community. What would you say?
The central claim of the Black Lives Matter movement was that the police were killing unarmed black men vastly disproportionately. That is simply not true. It may have been true decades ago, but it was not true when Black Lives Matter started in 2013. It has not been true according to all the data we have from the past decade. It's simply not true. It was a lie, and it was a massive lie. The truth is that in America, sorry, it's okay. We're good?
Yeah.
So I'm summarizing the data we have from between the Washington Post database, the Guardian database, and some other of our journalistic sources. Roughly 1,000 people a year in America in the past decade get killed by the police. Over 90% are armed and dangerous when they're killed. Of those that are unarmed when they get shot and killed, around 40% are white, around 40% are black, and around 20% are other. So that's been the reality. It changes year to year, but that's the basic picture. So you're talking about somewhere between, 12 and 40 unarmed black individuals that get killed by the cops in any given year. And in most years, in almost every year, there are a greater number of white people in absolute terms that are unarmed that get shot and killed by the cops. Not a single American knows any of their names, but there's videos on YouTube. Some of these are cases where the cop should go to prison. Others were totally legitimate, and everything else in between.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to the proportion, black Americans are 13% of the U.S. population, but somewhere north of 30% of those in prison. But this is primarily a consequence of different crime rates. In most years, the FBI Unified Crime Report show that about 50% of murders are committed and suffered by black people. In New York City alone, most years, about 90 to 95% of shootings are by black and Hispanic people combined, leaving only 5% of shootings in a given year in New York City in recent years would be by anyone who's not black or not Hispanic. White and Asian, almost non-existent. So when you're confronted with these differential rates of crime, of course the prison population is not going to look like the census. It's going to look like the population that's committing crime. Moreover, the people that the arrests and the interactions that end up with the police shooting unarmed people, those are results of 911 calls. The police are getting 911 calls, often from black people, coming to a scene where the suspect also happens to be black. It goes south, and they end up shooting that suspect. They're not getting the same number of 911 calls as are people in the general population. We're talking about mostly men. You're talking about mostly men under 30, and there's a skew towards black and Hispanic men. So the census figures are totally irrelevant as a benchmark when you're talking about who gets shot and who goes to prison. The benchmark is who's committing crime. So that was a total 100% myth that the Black Lives Matter leaders and advocates just were misinformed about or lied about, or they were too emotional to actually look at the evidence. Now, if you put that to the side and you say, what can you salvage of BLM that was actually true? I would say it is true, and there's good data to back it up, that the police are not more likely to kill a black suspect, but they are more likely to be suspicious, to harass a black suspect when he's done nothing wrong, and to treat a black suspect rough physically, short of pulling a trigger. So that was definitely true in New York during stop and frisk. I mean, the police were stopping and frisking any young black kid that looked suspicious to them. And they found some guns that way. Certainly, they took some guns off the street. But for every gun they took off the street, they might have, put 24 black kids, pinned 24 black kids against the wall that basically weren't doing anything wrong except for looking similar to the kids that...
Nu är vår Leo Jackpot uppe i 480 miljoner kronor. På Leo Vegas. Ladda ner vår app och spela de mest populära spelen som Pirates 4, Lightning Roulette och Starburst. Välkommen till Leo Vegas, Sveriges mobilkasino. Åldersgräns 18 år. Regler och villkor på leovegas.se.
Did have the guns. So, if the Black Lives Matter movement had been based on that truth, it would have been basically correct in its diagnosis of a problem. but it was unfortunately it was centered on this other thing that was a myth.
It was. I mean, there's you have the statistics. You go over it in the book as well. Like there was actually things were improving for. Other people have argued as well. Like things were improving for Black Americans up until the 60s, and then like a lot of measurements like unemployment, family, like people, mothers and fathers staying together. Things actually deteriorated after that, even after the Civil Rights Act. But you also had like during the time where people were overtly racist, and people are, and you still had Jim Crow laws. You still had all the things that we like on a very like from far away like associate perhaps with the southern states. You had that, but you was like the black minority was still improving in a lot of ways. They're like having it better in a lot of ways. But since then, it's a lot of more problems. And like in the 80s, you had the crack epidemic. Mm-hmm. You've had like single mothers. Like I think it's a majority of black kids growing up with single mothers. So many of the like things that should have improved when like people were getting like the majority were getting less racist, and you had like the laws of like affirmative action. But it's actually not improved, and people coming from other countries like immigrants have actually like surpassed, like come in from on a lower level, but then like surpassed the black community or the black minority in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. So if I'm trying to be as sympathetic as I can to the argument from people in the Black Lives Matter movement, or people who are more radical and wanting to Martin Luther King to be radical as well, like you could say like, well, why then doesn't, if everything is going so fine and everybody is so anti-racist, and why isn't it improving faster for black people then during this time?
Well, your question presumes that the overall well-being of black people would be a one-to-one function of how racist the rest of society is. That assumption is very dubious and probably wrong. I mean, we know throughout history there have been numerous examples of populations that have zoomed forward in economic terms, even under a regime of laws that discriminate against them viciously, like Jews or Japanese weren't allowed to own land in all the states that they lived in. They weren't allowed to own land or property.
Chinese
until the 1950s. And they zoomed ahead economically nonetheless, to the point where by 1960 they were out-earning white Americans. And so what you're talking about, between 1940 and 1960, the black poverty rate cut in half. That was largely a result of black people moving out of the South, coming to the North, getting better jobs. The Great Migration, the post-World War II boom, where there was lots of jobs available and a huge demand signal, and the ability of black people to move to Chicago and New York and all these places. Between 1960 and 1980, you didn't see progress to the same degree on economic issues. And people expected that, because they said, okay, now that we can vote, shouldn't everything else follow? But that's actually not how economic progress works. And so a few things. One, the trend of starting in 1963, you start to see all these problems. Crime rises between 63 and 91. And you get the exploding problem of single-parent homes, drugs, and the problems associated with what used to be called the black underclass or the black ghetto. But at the same time, the black middle class makes a lot of progress in these years. The segment of black people that avoided those issues, avoided single-parent homes, drugs, and crime, made great progress over this period on anything you can measure. Income, death from disease, life expectancy. And since the 90s, most of the problems have been slowly getting better, but they're still significant. And we can go into why those problems are a thing, but they were not caused by racism because, believe it or not, how black people are doing, how any group of people are doing is not a straightforward function of how the rest of society feels about them. The world is so much more complicated than that. Economies are changing. Literally the drugs that are available, drugs can just flood a city and destroy a city that weren't available and are extremely addictive. That has nothing to do with how people feel about you. Whether racists like you or not. There's nothing to do with what the laws are. It's these things are very complicated. And so what happened in the 60s, why all this stuff unraveled in the black ghetto, I think it had many causes. One, that conservatives like to highlight is the welfare state started paying black women to stay single. In other words, it was literally an incentive starting in the 60s that you would get a monthly check if you were poor, single, you had kids. The moment you get married, the check stops coming. So that's a disincentive from getting married. But combined with that, you had a huge cultural change in America, where America, from the 50s and further back, was a heavily Christian country and a conservative Christian country, socially conservative, in the sense that if you get a girl pregnant, her father will show up on your doorstep with a shotgun, the so-called shotgun wedding, and you have to marry her, and divorce is taboo. So that was as true among black Americans who were as Christian as white Americans were throughout the country. So in the 60s, that starts to go away. The country starts to secularize. You also have the sexual revolution, which loosens norms around having sex. It becomes more acceptable to have sex. And then you also have birth control, which means that lowers the incentive for a man to get married, because without birth control, women understand that sex can lead to pregnancy. And, basically single women can't just go around having sex because you'll get pregnant. Yeah. You'll bring shame to your family, as it would have been in those days. The greatest shame you possibly could to get married, and abortions weren't legal and were sketchy, and so women really couldn't afford to give it out so easily. Once birth control and everything comes along, well, actually, a psychologically normal woman can now afford to really act a little bit more like a man might. With her sexuality, which now lessens the incentive for a man to get married, because if it's easier for him to have commitment-free sex, then that lowers the incentive for him to commit. Yeah. So if you add all of these things, now not only that, you add to that the fact that now in the 60s and 70s, women enter the workplace. Women are now, it's socially acceptable for a woman to take a high-paying job that she's qualified for. She doesn't have to only be a secretary. This is a good thing. But it means that men are less useful now, because you don't necessarily need a man to be a breadwinner. And if men on average are less useful, then they're less attractive as partners. So men become less attractive as partners for women, both poor women and working, middle class working women, men have less of a need to get married in order to get sex. You add it all up, it's like these things affect the vulnerable communities most.
Yeah.
And that's why you see, starting in the 90s, the same trend hit the white working class as well.
Yeah, it's ironic.
Yeah. And deindustrialization.
We thought it was only black people.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it's the white working class or the poor white people. They have basically the same trajectory.
Trend hit later.
Yeah,
and less severe, but it did hit. And then there's also deindustrialization on top of that. So the factory jobs go overseas, or they get replaced by technology. And whole areas of the country hollow out that used to be thriving cities. Yeah. And so those guys can't get those kinds of jobs anymore. An average man who's not brilliant, who's not going to, go to college and be some intellect, just a man who worked with his hands, can't get those kind of jobs anymore. So you add this all up, and I think you get plus the new drugs that are coming in. So none of these individual trends really was born of racism. It was born of like technological change, cultural progress that had some drawbacks, economic shifts that were global in nature, and there you go.
Yeah. And like right now in you were talking about like everybody agrees that white supremacist ideology is bad, and I would say like of course you don't, when you say that, of course you don't mean like everybody, but like most people in most institutions nowadays, like like regular people. I think you gave in another podcast, you gave like if you ask people in polls, it's like 10% of the people answering are like, yes, black people are inferior. Yes, I would be angry if my daughter married a black guy and stuff. Yeah. So there is, of course, it's like a hardcore of, but it's not the way it used to be. But now, if you look at today, for example, the killing of Ukrainian refugee Irina Sarutska on the subway or train in Charlotte. It was a black man who killed her, and like I've turned off the function of autoplay on X now, but I managed to see like the murder. I'm not sure how many times out of just accident by scrolling, which is another question, like what that does to you, like how many murders are you supposed to see? Like, like I've seen so many murders.
Zero. I know.
I mean, it's like one of them really stuck with me. But that's another question. But the reaction, there are two main reactions that I've seen, and since I'm sitting in Sweden, I've probably missed a lot. But online, there's been like I've seen a lot of. I would say like anti-black racism, but you could also be like, if you would be like super charitable, you could say like it's anti woke, and like we are like we want to tell the truth about the statistics and stuff like that. That's like a little bit more benign version of it. Yeah, but it's been a lot that I've seen. Maybe it's because I've followed too many accounts that are like that, like and then like the algorithm thinks that you'll probably be interested in this racist meme. Right. But then on the other hand, you've had like I've also seen a lot of like talking heads trying to how did he feel? Like he was suffering. I also like.
I did see.
So it's like caught between like hardcore like anti-black racism, and then you have like stupid takes on like this poor guy who stabbed this woman. Like it's like, and if you look at the actual case, it seems actually obvious that he was not like a Black Panther. He's an actually clinically crazy homeless person.
Well, he was clearly crazy, but I think it's reported that he said, "I got the white girl" afterwards. So he could be a mix of both crazy and racist, but I don't think he belonged to any specific political organization or anything like that.
But my question is like, what to make of the reactions?
Yeah, like what's the sane
response to it?
Response to this. Okay, so there's a few things to say. One, for years and years, the mainstream media has highlighted examples, crimes that white people commit against Black people, just like this. And I'll give you one example. I think it was 2018 or 19. There was a Black girl that got shot in around Houston, Texas. She got shot randomly. It was tragic. She was like 7 years old or something. Her name was Jasmine Barnes. And murders like this happen all the time, right? But for some reason, somebody saw a white guy leaving the scene, like fleeing the scene in like a truck. And the news picked it up. White suspect kills Black girl. It was national news. The New York Times was covering it every single day.
Yeah.
It's like, why are we covering this? We're covering this because a white guy killed a Black girl, we think. No evidence it was a hate crime. No evidence of anything yet. We haven't even ID'd a suspect. But the New York Times was doing wall-to-wall coverage because it loved the idea of covering a white person that kills a Black person. Come to find out, they finally find the suspect. It was a Black guy. And it was a routine gang shooting, and it was a child that got caught in the crossfire. Happens all the time in inner cities in America. It's tragic. And those same outlets don't give a shit. They don't give a shit. They were like, oh, the white guy's not the suspect, and they'd stopped covering the story.
Yeah, move on.
Yeah. They had actually, I don't want to get into all the details, but it was such a clown show. You had politicians coming out and calling it a hate crime, not even knowing who the suspect was. You had people raising money and then awkwardly coming to find out it was actually just another Black-on-Black murder of the kind that they do not give a shit about and makes them yawn, and who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares, right? So this was the mainstream media. Now, Elon Musk buys X. He takes over X, which was liberal-leaning, and decides he's going to open the floodgates, no holds barred. A lot of actually liberals left X because they couldn't basically tolerate not being in charge of something for once. And basically X becomes like a slightly better version of 4chan and 8chan. So it's just like far right slop, basically. Like unregulated far right slop. Tons of racist stuff, I agree, that I see on X. Just taking glee in like any Black person that commits a crime anywhere. We're gonna pump it into your fucking consciousness because you need to see this 24/7.
Yeah.
And you rarely see white people committing crimes. It's like still half the murders in this country are committed by non-Black people. I never see those up on X. So still there's a slant in the opposite direction. There's like a racism to it. There's a glee to it. And then there is the genuine observation that the mainstream media has been doing the reverse for years, and they didn't care. So how are you going to come out of the woodwork now sanctimoniously and say, how dare you guys only care about crimes that have this racial dimension? You've been doing that this whole time.
Yeah.
So there is both sides can accuse the other of hypocrisy, and they're both right.
Yeah.
And I think the sane way to approach this stuff is that we need to get serious about we need to be tough on crime and make sure our cities are safe regardless of who the offender or the victim is. We should not care the race of the victim or the offender. We should locks psychopaths up for a long time. I mean, I don't know if this is accurate, but the early reporting on this Ukrainian girl is that the guy had been arrested like 10 times.
Yeah, I saw that and released, but it's also sort of like the judge who released him was also black. So then you sort of, then it's you can just imply that it's preferential treatment because of racial solidarity. I've seen like that argument being made. I have no idea, but like you like if you, that's what you invite when you are racializing the politics. Like people start to suspect. I think that was one of the like misrepresented. I'm not an expert in Charlie Kirk by any. I'm too old, I think. But I looked up some of the quotes, and like one was when he was talking about like DEI or like affirmative action, and like what that if you have those policies in place and you go on a plane and you see a black pilot, then you start questioning like, is this because like was he hired to a lower standard then?
Yeah.
So then you would get scared. But you cut out the first part. It sounds like black people can't fly planes.
Yeah.
I get scared. Like, and that wasn't the argument. You could still argue that he's wrong. Like, you could, if you are you think that it's appropriate with those kind of policies, but it means something else.
And the same thing about his comment about black women brain processing power. I don't know if you saw that one.
Yeah, that's been also going like doing the tours in Swedish media.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't say what people are saying he said. There are 4 specific black women, Michelle Obama, Sheila Jackson Lee, Ketanji Brown, and someone else. All 4 of them in different forums had admitted to being, they think, affirmative action admits. So they were raising their hand and saying, I was admitted because of affirmative action. I would not have gotten into the college I did or the law school I did or whatever, but for affirmative action. They were volunteering this information. And then he made a very snide, I would call it a mean comment, but they're public figures, whatever.
Yeah.
Saying, okay, well, if you're volunteering this information, then I'm going to make a mean comment that you're dumb, right?
Yeah.
Like, because you're volunteering this information. And again, he's not saying black women in general are dumb. He was saying these 4 that came out and volunteered that they actually didn't get good enough test scores to get into where they got into. I'm going to make, and obviously they were all Democrats, I think. So he likes to dunk on people in the other party.
Own the libs.
Yeah, he likes to own the libs. So, but this was not a racist comment. This was.
No. And even if they were, I mean, if you would be more charitable than he was, like they could be very smart, and they could still be affirmative action hires.
Yeah, they could.
And they wouldn't actually know if they would have gotten the position anyway.
That's true.
So it's actually wrong to imply that they are dumb. I have a friend who I know that she was hired because like she was a woman to that position. She was less qualified, and I know the people who were the guys who didn't get that position. They needed a woman, and the irony is that one of her, like the main profile questions that she's been was advocating was against that kind of policies. And so while they hired her, and then she wrote about that, and she like debated that.
Well, what is
people
she
around in
That's
her
like
community, like in the small circles that we all move in Sweden, like everybody knew, but you got. And so that was like one of the cruelest things you could do to her, basically. But of course, like she got a job, and it's like so she's not stupid or like bad at her job. It's just like you made everybody think that the thing she's debating is actually the thing that was. So it's like a double bind, or how do you say, like? But one of the things I've received criticism when I've argued against these kinds of policies is that, okay, but how do we Like how can we come from this place where we are more like in a less represented proportion to the population, like we're getting worse grades because we grow up in worse areas, worse schools. So like how do we, if we don't have these policies, it will take like, we've calculated somebody told me, they take like 300 years or something like that. So, and that's basically even more true, I think, when you look at...
to close the wealth gap or whatever?
Yeah, the wealth gap.
Yeah,
and
it's
like
the stupidest statistic I've ever heard. But.
Yeah, but like if you live in a black ghetto and you are... or like if you look at majority black areas where with large poverty rates, like how many of those there are and how many and how hard it can be then to get a fair chance, so to speak. And that's like the best argument for these policies, I would say, because then
no, it's not, because I mean if we're talking about affirmative action in DEI, how does a policy that kicks in at 18 years old have any chance of helping people whose disadvantage accrues from age 0 to 18? It doesn't make any sense. If you have someone that grows up in the ghetto with crime all around them, drugs all around them, poverty all around them, so many disadvantages, and you say, okay, you're on your own 0 to 18, the most crucial years for your entire emotional development, and then at 18, I'm going to send you to Harvard with the kids that have been going to Exeter and the best prep schools in the country for 18 years and have never, they do the best drugs, but, they're like smoking weed.
It's not crack.
Yeah, they don't do crack. They smoke weed after getting straight A's.
Yeah.
I mean, anyway. And they all come from 2-parent households and, okay, I'm just going to shove you into that school, even though you are not qualified to go to that school. You're going to be drowning next to your classmates. You're going to think you're an idiot, even though you're actually very smart, and you would do very well at a good state school. That's a very dumb policy. It has nothing to do with addressing poverty or the needs of the elite. Only 1% of black 18-year-olds in any given year get into college because of affirmative action. 1%. And it's kids like me. I don't know. I suspect I probably would have gotten in regardless. I'm not saying I am an affirmative action admin. I have no way of knowing. But it is kids like me with my background, my class background, that are admitted because of affirmative action. The other 99% of kids, black kids, either don't graduate high school to begin with, graduate high school, or don't go to college, or go to a college like a big state school that doesn't have affirmative action, doesn't need to have affirmative action because it has a very high acceptance rate. So, yeah, it's the actual policies that would benefit, obviously reducing crime, because if you grow up in a neighborhood riddled with crime, it's like very tough. Everything else is just tough. How do you expect a kid to focus on school if they're focusing on getting home safely? And not only that, there's a temptation of crime as a career and a lifestyle that kids in the ghetto have to have a higher willpower in order to avoid. So that's, if you grow up in a nice neighborhood, there's no gang life that's seducing you. Whereas if you grow up in a poor neighborhood, there are kids around you that are driving, fancy cars because they're selling drugs. Now you have to have the willpower to resist that, which a rich kid never is tested that way. So first of all, you've got to get a handle on crime. And then second of all, the economist Roland Fryer did a great study where he was able to take control of a dozen of the lowest, worst performing schools in Houston, that all basically it's poor black and Hispanic kids. And he was able to raise test scores significantly because he was he was given carte blanche to do whatever he wanted, which is a really rare study for that reason. He fired half the teachers and replaced them with better people. He fired all the principals, I think. And he extended the class day. He gave more frequent tests and intense private tutoring. I think he lengthened the school year a little bit, and he instituted what he called a culture of high expectations, which is like a tough love culture, high expectations culture. akin to what many charter schools successfully do. And he was able to raise test scores with all the kids that no other method has been able to help in these quote unquote failing schools and failing communities. And I don't think any of that is actually possible it's not possible to scale any of that because of the unions. You can't fire half the teachers at a school just because they're not very good teachers. No. You literally can't do it legally because of teachers' unions. And the power that they hold, they're enormously powerful voting bloc and support bloc within the Democratic Party. Democrats will never cross teachers' unions. So it's very difficult to know what to do without smashing teachers' unions and instituting the kind of friar protocol across the country. But if I were emperor, that's what I would do.
Thank you, Emperor Coleman Hughes, for being part of Rak Höger.
Thank you for having me on.
Och stort tack till er som lyssnar. Och vi får inget pressstöd, vi tar inte emot pengar från någon intresseorganisation eller lobbygrupp. Det är endast tack vare er prenumeranter vi kan fortsätta vara självständiga röster i en konform samtid. Och blir ni betalande prenumeranter idag får ni 30% rabatt. Gå då in på www.enrakhoger.se/podd för att ta del av erbjudandet. Vi hörs om en vecka igen. Och där tog det stopp. Ja, Ivar Arpi här igen. Om du vill höra resten av den här podden så måste du vara prenumerant på Kvartal, som jag nu har blivit en del av. Om du redan är prenumerant på min Substack Rak Höger så blir du nu automatiskt prenumerant på Kvartal och kan logga in i Kvartals app med din mailadress. Så kolla din mail för mer information. Men om du inte ännu är prenumerant på Rak Höger eller Kvartal så kan du testa att bli det i en månad helt gratis på kvartal.se/testa-Ivar. Så för att testa mig, mina poddar, mina texter och resten av Kvartals texter och poddar gratis första månaden, gå till kvartal.se/testa-Ivar så kan du börja med att höra resten av den här podden.
Get ready Sweden! BetMGM är här. Nu kan du uppleva spänningen från Las Vegas i mobilen. Ta chansen att spela på Bellagio roulettebord eller våra exklusiva MGM-slots. BetMGM. Casino och sport i mobilen. Åldersgräns 18 år. Regler och villkor gäller.